I understand there have been a lot of people that feel that they've been hurt out there and have been hurt. By I mean, this week we just had this huge thing here in Pennsylvania released about the Catholic Church. So I would try to choose my words carefully, or to not. I'm not talking about any one group or whatever, but I think in general we've gotten a little overly sensitive in this country. Where I saw an interview by, name again, brain fart here on names. The comedian that was on Tim Allen. I was thinking Rick Allen. When I saw a comment from Tim Allen recently, responding to a question about the Roseanne comments. And this is like 3 or 4 weeks after, the hubbub had died down. And he made such a relevant point when he said, I've been a comedian for 39 years, and our job as comedians is to push the boundaries, to make people think, hopefully make them laugh as they're thinking. And he said, I wonder now where we stand today, who gets to decide what's funny, what's proper, what's improper? If it's me speaking for Shane Douglas, I'd love it, because I get to decide what's tasteful, what's distasteful, what's funny, what's not funny, and what's disgusting and harmful or abusive. And you guys don't. Nobody else does, just me. But that's not how the world works. The world works right now. We're seeing this thing where it's sort of this evolving mass of mercury that some days it's this and some days it's that. Somebody says they're offended by this, and it's like, for instance, what's her name? Argenta, the actress who accused Harvey Weinstein. I'm not for a second defending Harvey Weinstein, but I find it, almost apropos that now she's admitted to having made a payment to buy somebody's silence about whatever. You see what I'm saying? Like, where does sanity stop and where does it begin? Who gets to decide what's proper and what's improper? I think, there are certain universalities. Anybody, I think, anybody with a brain and with any taste and class and sense of right and wrong would say doing anything to a child is, you got to be shot. And anybody doing anything to take advantage of elderly people or, people that have, mental or physical limitations should be shot. I mean, those are certain universalities. But when you break into this, when, it's a room full of just average people and one person says something that somebody else says they're offended by, but the rest of the room laughs, is the rest of the room wrong for laughing? And who gets to decide? That's the question. Like, the world has changed in many ways for the better, and in some ways really questionable since I've been a kid. Who gets to decide? Who gets to be the policeman that says, Chad, what you said is right, ha ha ha, and JP, what you said is wrong, boo. Now we're going to have to ostracize you and get you fired from your job and all the rest. It's a really nebulous question, and one that demands that somebody sooner or later answer. Otherwise, nobody's going to be telling any jokes because you might offend somebody, and we'll get to the point where we can't even make eye contact because you might think I'm ogling you. Again, where does this insanity end? I was checking out a Walgreens a little while ago with my boys with me, and the lady behind the counter, nice looking young girl, worked behind the counter, kept calling me honey and sweetheart. Do you have a card with a sweetheart? Okay, honey, well, here's how you slide your card, sweetheart. And I thought to myself, if this were turned around, if I was standing back there and she was checking out and I was saying those things, I'd be in damn big trouble with Walgreens, because I'm trying to be nice to this young lady. I didn't take it in any way offensive. I didn't take it in any way condescending. But again, flip that around put me behind that counter and let me call that customer sweetheart and honey. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
It's, my mom told me when I was a small kid and taught me, my parents taught me from the time I was a small kid, you don't get to have it both ways, son. And yet it seems to me like now suddenly we're in this shifting world that every day, like today something's funny, but tomorrow it's not. And it's only funny if you're in a certain group, but not in another group. And quite frankly, as an old guy, I'm having a real tough time trying to ascertain what is funny anymore, and am I allowed to laugh, and what's offensive, what's not offensive. I just find it insane, all of it. I really do. Crazy.
So is this writer, obviously the writer's not one of the boys, but is this writer kind of breaking the code of even talking about this? Because, look, what happens backstage, it happens backstage. I'm sure, and I'll reference Jim Cornette. I had actually first heard about it from his show and a clip that was posted on YouTube. I guess the story kind of blossomed as the days went on, but Jim Cornette was talking about how, Dusty Rhodes would be known to be in his cowboy boots and cowboy hat. And that's it.
Ribs were ubiquitous back then in the industry. And I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to get any heat on anybody and say something, because should the sands change a little bit tomorrow and suddenly something tomorrow is offensive that wasn't offensive today. I never took any of it personally. I never took anything that anybody was doing. It always seemed to me as exactly what it was. The guy's blowing off steam. The guy's having a good time. The guy's trying to lessen the stress of being on the road 350 plus days a year. I never took it as, and it seems if, the people that were coming to the shows, that you saw show after show after show, many times at the shows, multiple times after the shows, didn't seem like they were very offended by what was going on, because if you're offended, you wouldn't come back the next time, right? So, like I said, way at the beginning of this podcast, I think everybody just has to stop and take a deep breath and say, stop all this what about meism. Quite frankly, I don't think the world gives a shit if Shane Douglas is offended by something or not. At least I would hope they aren't. Because in the overall scheme of the cosmos of 7 billion people on this planet, not very important. But if somebody gets so hyper offended because I said sweetheart to somebody or honey, like the young lady at Walgreens did to me tonight. And like I said, I didn't take it offensively. I didn't take it as she was coming on to me or trying to sexually abuse me. I took it as a young lady being polite and trying to make me comfortable and checking out. Now, I'm sure if I would tomorrow go down there and talk to man and say, that young lady you had working last night called me sweetheart and honey, and I was offended and blah, 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 blah. I probably could get that young lady in trouble. Why the fuck would I do that? I was not offended. It was not an offensive thing that young lady did. But again, if there's what about meism? Well, Shane Douglas is the most important being on the planet. Only I matter. You guys don't matter. And that young lady trying to be nice doesn't matter. Screw her. I'm going to get her fired. Come on. Now, if she comes up and as she's saying that, starts trying to touch my privates or something, it's a little different, but in the overall scheme of the call, again, I want somebody to give me the stone tablet of what is copacetic and what is not copacetic, what today is allowed and what is not allowed. And if we disseminate that to the entire population, I'm sure we can all agree to and live by. But when it's like shifting sands in a desert, well, Chad, I know what you said yesterday wasn't offensive, but today it is. So sorry, pal, we got to get you fired. How can you live by that? I mean, how can any of us know what's right or wrong? And the only thing I see coming from that is we all stop communicating. We all stop talking, looking at each other, hanging out with each other, because God forbid I might say or do something that offends somebody. I don't think anybody listening to this podcast, and certainly as I'm saying is I'm not thinking that this is not an easy thing to solve. Offensive behavior is offensive behavior. And most sentient and intelligent adults can figure that out very quickly. What is offensive and what is not offensive, what is funny and what's not funny. So if this is something Randy Orton was doing, I personally, in full disclosure, never saw Randy Orton do that, never did it to me, so I can't speak from personal experience. But it seems to me, knowing the dressing room and the phrase we use in the dressing room, all the boys, meaning all the men and women in the dressing room, I don't see that as an offensive thing. Now, if he's going out and every time he meets a fan saying, hey, that's something different. But the dressing room is something different. It's sort of the inner sanctum, the inner holy of holies, where we get to let our hair down, get to speak our mind. In the dressing room situation, if somebody does something that's offensive, typically you can go over and pull that person aside and say, that wasn't very cool, dude. And I can't think of a time when somebody did that person continued doing that. But it's so seldomly done, in that inner dressing room and in that inner sanctum and inner holy of holies where we get to be ourselves. Very few people have ever complained about that because nobody ever takes it offensively. It's just a question of, is somebody being overly sensitive, or is somebody saying, look, I can get some brownie points or maybe get a weigh-in or maybe get a lawsuit and get some money from if I just say this was offensive to me. Well, who knows? I don't know Randy Orton that well. I can't think if I've ever met. I may have met him, said hello once or twice. But here's an idea. If he does that and you don't find it funny, maybe pull him aside and say, hey, dude, I'm not into that. Didn't think it was funny. Would appreciate if you don't do it again. I'd be shocked, in fact, if he came back and did it again. But again, it's in my earlier statement. If it was funny yesterday, man, nobody's sure today, but it's not funny tomorrow. Who gets to be the arbiter of that? Who gets to be the policeman on telling Randy Orton it was funny yesterday, today, and tomorrow it's not funny? I don't know about you guys, but I think that's a pretty damn tough thing to disseminate and discern.
It's a huge thing to disseminate and discern, but just hypothetically speaking, doesn't need to be an admonishment of what happened or an endorsement, but funny or not funny?
I'd say pretty funny for where, my place in the business, funny because, again, that's, it's not like you're going on the Titantron and doing this to every fan in the building, right? You're doing it. And my understanding of the way I've understood it is that this is something he's doing like somebody new coming into the dressing room and, a bigger name, trying to make that person feel a little uncomfortable for that few seconds and then welcoming them into that fraternity. Harmless.